Hello everyone. In this series of videos, I'll be explaining topics that I've found to be tricky using visual methods, and I'll also show some memorization tools that I personally found helpful when studying different topics for the USMLE. And for this video specifically, we'll be talking about what causes the ECG changes in Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome. But before that, let me quickly review the normal ECG pattern and how it's generated in the normal heart. Okay, so just quickly as a reminder, we all know that the normal healthy pacemaker of the heart is the sinoatrial node, the SA node. And the SA node gives the impulse for both of the atria to contract. And when both of the atria contract, we get what we see on the ECG as the P wave. Okay. Now, after the P wave happens, the impulse travels down into the AV node. Here, we have to know a very important thing about the AV node, which is that the AV node acts as a delay or a stop for the impulse. Here it will delay its descent into the His bundle. Now, what is the significance of this? Now, let's imagine if the impulse travels very quickly down into the ventricles and making it contract. Here, the ventricles won't have enough time for blood to fill in, and thus the cardiac output will be decreased, and we don't want that to happen. Okay, so instead, the AV node acts as a delay to help the ventricles to relax during diastole to a good amount that lets it fill enough and have a good cardiac output. Okay, now back into the ECG. So as we said, there is electrical silence in the AV node, and this electrical silence transmits into the ECG as the PR segment we see here. Okay, now the impulse will continue its descent via the bundle of His into the right and left, and the Purkinje fibers into the ventricles, which essentially results in the contraction of the ventricles. And on the ECG, the contraction of the ventricles has different patterns, mean the septal contraction, the basal, etc. We will dig into deep details of this in a later video, but essentially that will result as the QRS pattern. Okay. Now, after that, after full depolarization of the ventricles, again, there is electrical silence, and this will translate as the ST segment, and then when the ventricles repolarize, this will result as the T wave. Okay, so that was a small recap, and what I want you to know from this recap is two very important points which will help you to understand the ECG changes in Wolff-Parkinson-White, which is, so pause in the AV node, we have the PR segment, electrical silence, flat line. And when the impulse travels via the His bundle to make the ventricles contract, we have a very nice narrow QRS, which we would see in a normal person. So an impulse that makes the ventricles contract, that travels via the His Purkinje system, results in a narrow QRS. And an impulse that delays in the AV results in the flatline PR segment. Okay, so what is the difference of what we talked about in Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome? In Wolff-Parkinson-White, there is an accessory pathway. Other than what we talked about, as we see here, there's an accessory pathway. So let's simulate what would happen if the SA node fires here. If the SA node fires here, the impulse has two options to go to. It either can go to the accessory pathway or it can go into the AV node. And essentially it will go to both. But only one will succeed in the excitation of the ventricles. And the reason is for that we just talked about, but we will repeat it here, which is if the SA node fires, let's say the impulse will go simultaneously to the accessory pathway and to the AV node. When it will go to the AV node, there's a delay before it can continue to the ventricles. Meanwhile, when it goes to the accessory pathway, and that's why they call it the fast accessory pathway, there is no delay. So the impulse will win against the AV node by reaching first to the ventricles and making it contract. But of course, not all the impulses that originate from the SA node will all travel to the accessory pathway, and on an ECG will all result in these findings that we will talk about. Some impulses can still go via the AV node and His Purkinje system because the accessory pathway at that time specifically can be refractory. So here, the ventricle contracted without delaying in the AV node and without passing through the His Purkinje system. So here we see the ECG changes, and we see the P wave, which resembles the atrium contraction. But here the impulse will go down via the accessory pathway instead of the AV node, and this will result in early pre-excitation of the myocardium. And this early pre-excitation of the myocardium via the accessory pathway will translate as the delta wave. Now, as we can see that the delta wave started relatively earlier than a normal QRS would start after a normal P wave. Let's see, this is a P wave, then there is a good pause, and there is a QRS. Here, there is no good pause. There is a fast start of a delta wave, which means early pre-excitation for myocardium. So if we would see PR interval from the beginning of the P wave until the beginning of the delta wave, it is relatively shortened in relation to a normal PR interval. Now what about the third change, which is why there is a widened QRS? The QRS is not normal and narrow as we see here. It's often bizarre and widened. And because of this, because the ventricles contracted using a pathway that is not the His-Purkinje system, this will result in a widened QRS. So right now we just tackled the three changes that occurs in Wolff Parkinson White, which are the shortened PR interval and the delta wave and the widened QRS.